Hello, I'm Morag and welcome to this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World podcast. In this podcast, I invite you to join me in conversation with leading permaculture-related educators, thinkers, activists, authors, designers, and practitioners to explore the kind of thinking and action we need to navigate a positive and regenerative way forward, to myceliate possibilities and share ideas of what a thriving one planet way of life could look like. My guests offer voices of clarity and common sense. I'm joined today by the wonderful Manda Scott. Manda is an award-winning novelist, host of the international chart-topping Accidental Gods podcast, and co-creator of the Thrutopia masterclass, which I've attended. Manda is best known for the best-selling Boudica Dreaming series, and her latest novel, Any Human Power, is a mytho-political thriller which lays out a Thrutopian roadmap to a future we'd be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. With degrees in veterinary medicine and a master's in regenerative economics from Schumacher College, Manda's life is oriented towards creating radical new narratives that will pave the way to the total systemic change our culture and our world so urgently needs. In this podcast, we talk about the power of story, what's possible, shamanic dreaming, engaging our collective imagination, where we feel drawn to pay attention in the meta crisis that humanity is facing. And of course, we talk about her new Thrutopian novel, Any Human Power. Before we head to the conversation, I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm recording this episode from my hand-built solar-powered studio here in beautiful Gubbi Gubbi country with the Jinnaburra lands to my east. I'm surrounded by my permaculture forage gardens in a permaculture eco-village. This podcast is a project of the Permaculture Education Institute. We teach permaculture design, teaching and livelihood skills online to people on 6 continents, who in turn localize and enrich it and find appropriate ways to apply the planet care ethics of earth care, people care and fair share wherever they are. Remember to subscribe to the Sense Making a Changing World podcast on your favorite podcast app, to share it freely and leave us a 5-star review and lovely comment. It really does help people find our podcast. All right, well, let's turn now to my conversation with Manda Scott. Well, hello, Manda, and thank you so much for joining me here on the Sense Making the Changing World. It's an absolute delight and honor to have you here, and particularly because you have a new book out, Any Human Power, a Thrutopian thriller. I think perhaps if we could begin by asking firstly for you to describe what Thrutopia means from your perspective, and also what is a Thrutopian thriller? I mean,
okay,
and why and how you picked that as a way to communicate a Thrutopian message.
And we could just spend the hour just on this, you realise, but I'll try not to. And first, just to say, it's an honour to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really grateful. In my world, we're all in a bus, and there are a number of mostly old white men clamped their hands on the wheel and their foot on the gas, and it's heading straight for the edge of a cliff. The multipolar, whatever we want to call it, polycrisis, metacrisis, climate emergencies, social emergency, all the emergencies that we know exist, AI emergency, etc. And yet, there is still time to turn the bus from the edge of the cliff. I am pretty certain of that for a number of reasons we can't go into. In order to do that, I believe, we need to change our meta-narrative. The who are we, what are we doing, why are we here, what are we for narrative, which is sustained by stories. We are a storied species. For 300,000 years, we sat around campfires and told each other stories to ourselves and of ourselves, to ourselves and of ourselves. And in the last few hundred, we've converted to print and then to digital media. But we're still telling stories about who I am and who you are, between ourselves and our relationship to the rest of the web of life, which is really important. And we need to change the nature of those stories. And most stories that look forward, the topias, are either dystopias, which are making me increasingly cross, to be honest, because it's not hard as a creative person. I can look down the road, see what happens when we bring the worst of humanity together, and you cross the road with The Handmaid's Tale, and you get a future where, I've said this so often, it's a bit boring, but it's what I say. We get kebabbed over piles of burning tires by our bigger and nastier neighbours. It's grim, and we all know it. And everybody goes, oh yes, but if I, the writer, describe how bad things are going to be, then everybody will change. And it doesn't work. And it was never going to work. This is not the way that human neurophysiology works. You can't frighten people into changing behavior. If you point a gun at their head, you more or less can. If the fire is actually happening, you can get them to move out of the building sometimes, not always. And the things are going to be really, really bad for your kids if you don't change your behavior now. It's not going to work. Even now that we know it's going to be really bad in the next 10 or 20 years if we don't change our behavior now, it's still not going to work. It's not how we're wired. So, and I'm a shamanic practitioner. We may get to that because it influenced the book a lot. I teach contemporary shamanic practice. Where we put our energy is where we get to. The more we put our energy on, oh goodness, things are going to be really bad, that's where we go to. But then the utopias are not that useful because they might be beautiful and happy little unicorns skipping through the daisies, and everybody thinks like I do, whoever I am, the writer, and everything's gorgeous. But there's always a jump cut. It's either in a future and something bad happened back there and we all got better and everything is good now, or it's on a different planet or in a different time frame. And you can't see how to get through from here to there. So the Thrutopias are premised on the fact that there is a future that we'd be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. I want 7 generations down the line for them to look back at us, who are here now, and they will say, yes, we left it way, way, way too late. And yes, we made a lot of really egregious errors along the way. But when it actually mattered, we got together, we worked out our common values, and we brought to bear the extraordinary creativity of all humanity, or at least all of our hegemonic culture, onto how do we turn the bus from the cliff? What are we here for? Why are we doing this? How do we connect to the greater emergent, complex amazingness of the web of life and ask it, what do you want us to do here and now as part of the conscious part of the nodes of your being, and do it. And to begin to change that narrative, I think we need Thrutopias. And I thought this, and I ran something called the Thrutopia Masterclass as I was writing the book to try and get other writers to do it. So I was already writing the book when I conceived of the concept. And the actual word comes from Professor Rupert Reed, University of East Anglia, ex of the University of East Anglia. He's now running the Climate Majority Project, or at least part of it. And he wrote a paper in 2017 in Huffington Post. And so when I was setting up the course and I wanted to be on it, and he said, what are you calling it? I haven't got a title yet. And he said, good, because it's a Thrutopia. And so I have his permission to use it. And so now we just need every other, if there's a writer listening to this, I don't care if you're writing fiction or non-fiction or scripts, movies, television, songs, poetry, letters to your local newspaper, conversations with your friends. We're all creative at every point. Please take as your assumption that the existing system is not fit for purpose. It is falling apart, and there is something we can build as we're moving to a new system. It doesn't have to slide into extinction and collapse. Does that?
And I think what's really interesting too about where you've situated this novel, and what I've heard you speak about before too, is the future is now. And your novel is set in 2023, which is kind of a now. It's a present time. It's not a futuristic novel. It's not a historical. And so this notion of time, I think, is really important. As you were saying, that it's quite disempowering sometimes to think, oh, we're working to something in the future. It's really about what's going on now, and that is this key part of the Thrutopianness. And I wonder whether you could just speak to that thing of the context of time and future, and how bringing things into the present matters.
Wow. So in a lot of the time slip novels where somebody goes back in time, there's always that terror of you change one tiny thing and the whole of the future becomes different. I'm sure you've all read the movie. If anybody hasn't, there's a book called The Kingdoms by, God, my brain. I'll think of it in a minute. And it's absolutely extraordinary. And the whole premise is flipping through timelines. And at one point, somebody said something and somebody else goes back in time, and the light bulbs are beginning to change how they look. And then everything changes. And it's a really, really clever way of looking. Natasha Pulley. It's a brilliant, beautiful novel. And it's such a clever way of slipping time. And yet, everybody looks at our actions in the present and go, well, there's nothing I can do because it won't make any difference, which is wholly untrue. At every level, it's untrue. And if enough of us get together and go, we're not happy with the way things are running at the moment. I think a lot of people say the current system is broken, and I don't think it is. I think it's working exactly as it was designed to work. It's just not actually fit for purpose. It's not conducive to the flourishing of complex life on this planet, basically. And if we want the flourishing of complex life on this planet to be a thing, then we need a different system. And the system is what it is because we all collude with it. And at the point where we say, here, now, in this moment, I take my energy from that, And I will begin to make things different. And it's a hyper complex system. It's not a linear thing where I take step A and then B is guaranteed to happen, and then C. We can't do that. We can take ourselves to the emergent edge of what Indy Johar calls interbecoming, which is a stage more engaged than interbeing is beautiful. And I think it's a really interesting idea. But interbecoming is change will happen. If I can take myself to the edges of who I am, still grounded, still connected to the web of life, and be and express the difference in as many ways as I possibly can. So we need, politics, obviously, economics, obviously, food systems, transport, building, making, designing, being, the stories that I tell. Why am I doing this? And I think that's really core. We need to get back as far upstream as we can. And the highest upstream is, what am I here for? And the existing system is here on the basis that who dies with the most toys wins. And everybody buys into that. If I don't gather enough units of value, whatever they are, dollars, pounds, anything, I will end up under a bridge somewhere, living out of a cardboard box, and life will be horrible. And if you're in countries that don't even have healthcare, there will be nothing. There is no safety net. Our system is designed to keep us scared and in the system. And we don't have to end up living in a cave off the west end of Wales, which is as far off the edge of nowhere as you can get in this country. You can, because that's, I would say, so I have students in the shamanic world who do live in a straw bale hut with no, they're completely off grid, and that's possible. But they also don't have that much of an influence on the people around them because they don't engage. And I think energetically they're doing amazing work, and I wouldn't suggest that if that's your thing, then do it, because they are extremely anchored, connected people. But for most of us, we exist in this system. So the challenge then is, how do we become other? While this system dies around us, how do we become the green shoots arising up? And for each of us, it will be slightly different. But what matters is we do it 100%. Do what works for you. Work out and become, I think we need to all become a bit of a polymath. It's not enough to be really into regenerative agriculture, although I think that's a really amazing thing. You need also to be aware of our clothing. How are we clothing ourselves? How are we heating ourselves? How are we moving around? Because these are part of what we do. Food, shelter, warmth, social connections. And I think in the end, it all comes back to abandoning the dopamine drips of our current culture and moving to a serotonin mesh of a connected culture, which is probably a whole other conversation.
There's something I was reading yesterday. It was a comment to a new film that's just come out from Local Futures. And it disturbed me because, well, maybe it unsettled me in a good way. It was saying that here is again another group of talking heads talking about these issues. Like, I'm in the film, so I kind of went, oh gosh, and they're saying it's a bit tired, this narrative, and I went, oh gosh,
really?
And so I'm really curious to ask you about that. Like, where are you finding the edges of inspiration? And what was current 5 years ago, even now. There's new languages, there's new way. And I ask this question too, because, I focus a lot of what I do around permaculture. And I know that permaculture has a 50-year history, but constantly trying to build, open new edges and, expand the field of that too. So I'm just curious about where are the edges that you're finding inspiration today, in this moment, that can help to inspire.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if this is a tired narrative, what is the see, want, take, scarcity, separation, and powerless narrative? People not a bit tired of that too?
Yeah.
That blows my mind, actually. I think you just need to go back far enough and see, where are the incentives for that statement. Because for sure, follow the incentives and you get the outcome. I think there are two answers to that. One is spiritual. The edges of myself are to what extent can I balance on the knife edge of the moment and connect to the web of life? And that is a continual edge, and it's a continual source of awe and wonder and gratitude, and that sense of, oh wow, that's amazing. I wonder what happens next. That I think awe and wonder are a really crucial part of what we're doing, and there is no tiring in being awed and full of wonder. That's part, I think, of the human condition, is if one can live at the edge where that exists, where every moment is, wow, that's amazing. I wonder what happens next. Then the world opens up and life becomes a thing that we engage with at a different level. I think I tell my students, if you get to the point where you're in love with being alive, the world is different. It feels really different. But that is definitely a spiritual practice. And some people just don't have a sense of a spiritual being, and that's completely fine. And you can't force it on somebody. And so the kind of more social, technological, more possibly mundane edge, I can't even begin to think how somebody gets to the idea that this is a target. There's so much. We are in the singularity of so many curves. I heard the other day, we all live in Moore's law, which was computing power will get twice as powerful and half as expensive every 2 years. With AI, the chips become 10 times more powerful in 6 months, and that the next time, so this time it's 6 months, next time it's 5 months, the next time that it's 4 months. So in a year, the chip has become 100 times more powerful, and in the next year, it will be 1,000 times more powerful than that. We are in a double exponent on AI, and we don't know where that's going to go. And if that doesn't leave somebody right on the edge of into becoming, I don't know what would. That's not possible. That's a tired narrative because we have absolutely no idea where that's going to go. And while the incentive system is that it's going to make huge amounts of money for a small number of people, that's not going to be good. I would think it would be a really, really, really good idea to change that incentive system really fast, because it does have the capacity to do quite interesting things to all of us. That takes me to the edge of myself. The concepts, so many concepts. If we are going to dismantle the existing system, and I think it's crumbling around us, without question, it's obvious. You just look at the news, the system is dying. But I think it wouldn't hurt to dismantle it consciously.
This is a good spot to pause and let you know that our focus here at the Permaculture Education Institute is teaching permaculture teachers through our Permaculture Educators program. This is a program I designed and host. It includes 2 certificate courses, the internationally recognised Permaculture Design Certificate and our Permaculture Teacher Certificate. You can sign up and start today and become part of our international learning community spanning 6 continents. People are stepping up to become part of this global myceliating network of permaculture educators and leaders, creating localized, positive, and practical responses to the need that we have for one planet living, for well-being of people and planet, for all life. We'd love your company. Find out the details on our Permaculture Education Institute website. The links are in the show notes. So let's continue in this conversation with Manda Scott.
But not everybody has any spiritual inclinations, and you can't force it. It's either there or it's not. I think in the end that if we're heading for the conscious evolution of humanity, and I think we have to, there's an old saying by E.O. Wilson, who was a genius and is sadly no longer with us, that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, the technology of gods, and this is not serving us very well. And we either downgrade the technology to meet the others, which is not going to happen, or we upgrade our emotions and our institutions to match the technology. And upgrading our emotions and our institutions, the first is spiritual. We are going to have to evolve consciously, evolve our consciousness consciously, which is a big task. And yet, I think, again, with almost all of these things, there are tipping points. If enough people do it, the ripples will spread out. Upgrading our institutions is an essential and urgent task. We're in the middle of an election in the UK, and I so hoped we'd get the book out and have 6 months to build the movement, and then an election would happen and we'd be able to go, look guys, this is what we were here for. And we launched the book 4 days after he had announced the election, and we couldn't pull it at that point. And I didn't want to pull it. I want it out there, but I'm not entirely sure there's time to get the word out to everybody that this is what we need to do. So, and I think the next election's too late. But we need to upgrade our institutions. They are not fit for purpose. The way we do democracy is not democracy, it's a kleptocracy. We have the best democracy money can buy, and that's not good enough. So the upgrading of all of our institutions, of our value system, why are we doing what we're doing? If it is to enrich a very, very small number of people at the top, that's not good enough anymore. And everything that we do is tainted by modernity. I'm reading a brilliant book, which I took downstairs last night, called Hospicing Modernity, which is totally worth reading for everybody. But the thing about the hospicing of modernity is that's never going to be in any way stale. It's another emergent process. And for me, being at the edge of into becoming of emergent processes is an endless dance on the knife edge of a razor with 100,000-foot drop on either side. It's that is never going to be a stale thing. So I think whatever anybody gets into, the concepts of change, the concept that change is happening whether we like it or not, and we can still shape it. And the shaping of it is urgent if we want there still to be some sense of agency. That removes any sense of staleness, I would say.
Yeah. So where do you see the power lies for this change to happen? And, in terms of decision making and governance, and what is the different texture of power, I suppose?
I think, and certainly I wrote in the book, that power now comes from our different senses of community. So until very recently, our communities were of place because most people could walk a certain distance. And we had the Dunbar number of 144, whatever, that was roughly the number of people with whom we could hold decent connections and still be in good relationship. And I think that's rather tainted in our, what Francis Weller calls the trauma culture. I think his difference between an initiation culture, which is how we evolved as humanity and how all of the first peoples were, and the trauma culture that then swept around the globe is quite distinct. And taking our concept of community from the last couple of thousand years in the islands of Britain, for sure, is not what real community is. That's broken community. Real community was when we were still whole.
The trauma culture and initiation culture.
So the initiation culture is 300,000 years of human evolution and all of the indigenous existing cultures that can maintain it in the face of pretty horrible pressures. So for Weller, and I'm stealing this directly from Francis Weller, and two things influenced him. He was very influenced by Patrice Malidoma-Somé, who wrote Of Water and the Spirit, and he's a trauma therapist. So this arises out of his understanding of those. But an initiation culture, individuals within the culture go through a series of contained encounters with death. And that's really important, the containment and the encounters with death. So birth is an encounter with death, both for the mother and the child. Death is an encounter with death which is essentially an initiation process into whatever happens next. In between, there are others. And so the obvious one that we would fasten on to, it's definitely not the only one, it would be the teenage rites of passage from childhood to adulthood. And the point is the container. The individual is allowed to move or pushed to the edges of themselves, to the edges of their capacity to cope, such that they find out where the edges are and that they can move beyond them. And really crucially, they learn how to ask for help because the container is held by the elders, particularly by the shamans, whatever we call the wise people, but all of the elders and the community and the land and the web of life, and in some cultures, the ancestors. And so they learn how to ask for help of each of these things. And if they survive it, and survival is not necessarily a given, some people just don't, they come back as a new person, and they're new because they've learned the child doesn't need to ask for help. The help is given. We're born into that sense of being cherished and loved and cared for and supported in everything. And being taught, when you ask why and what, you're given, let me take you to the tree and you learn about a tree. Let me show you the tracks of the snake that is dangerous and how we know where it is and how to know when it's not dangerous. All of those things are being given. At that point of stepping into adulthood, I learn that the world is there and I know how to ask. And I come back knowing that I know this. And I have then that sense of pride of being. I am respected by people that I respect. And each of these things, we know with our nice Western mindset, these are serotonin mesh makers. There are two reward systems in our brain, and one is dopamine based. And the point about the dopamine hits is that they're short term, they are not self-reinforcing, and it takes a greater hit next time to create the same burst this time. This is what addiction is about. And it's addiction for cocaine or alcohol or pornography or outrage on the internet. The way that they are harvesting our attention and hijacking our limbic system is dopamine hits. So we get to the point where Nate Hagen says that what our culture does is convert barrels of oil into microliters of dopamine. And it's not self-reinforcing. That's the point. You need more each time. Whereas serotonin is self-reinforcing. The serotonin mesh of connection to community, whether it's human community or more than human community, is self-reinforcing. It feels good and it endures. Those pathways endure. So you come back into your people, whoever your people are, and you know who you are. You know what you're good at. You've found what it is that is yours to do. And you are honored and respected for that. And among people who will support you in the doing of it, while you support them in doing what is theirs to do. And that creates an extraordinary web of resilience and connection. And it's really important to say that for none of these people is their world only human. The more human is as much a part of their relationship network as the human. The person who wrote the book that I now can't lay my hands on, The Hospice in Modernity, and I can't remember her name, Vanessa something de Oliveira, is Brazilian and she's part indigenous and part German. And her indigenous grandfather told her that the essence of the catastrophe that was colonialization wasn't the taking of the land and the killing of the people. Those were bad, but they were epiphenomena of the core, which is the sense that we are separate and separable, and that things can be separable. And the indigenous people, the whole people, the initiation cultures know that we are not separate. And we've told ourselves with our head minds this bizarre story that we are, when the evidence all around us is that, of course, we're not. But we act as if we are. So the trauma culture, the encounters with death are not contained. There is nothing. There's just trauma stacking until it overflows into the health crises that we've had for 2,000 years and longer. It's not that this is new, but something happened. There was a schism at some point, and we're never going to know what it is, but it obviously was around the time and the mental shift that's required for agriculture. You cannot perform the kind of agriculture that does big monocultures, harnesses an ox, so takes a wild buffalo, and it'll take a long time because you try harnessing a wild buffalo and you're going to end up with a lot of fractured limbs. But you've got to that point where you make this animal do something that is not in its nature. You own it. You own the land. So we know now that when Cook arrived in Australia, or when white people arrived in the Amazon, they were arriving on a landscape that was to an extent managed, and there was some form of agriculture, but it was agriculture with the land, not agriculture in spite of and against the land. And we know from archaeology in the islands of Britain that agriculture came 4,500 years ago for a while, and it lasted 2 or 3 generations, and the people went, you know what, this isn't fun. We're not enjoying doing this. And they went back to harvesting hazelnuts from the forests as their main source of winter carbohydrate for quite a long time, for several centuries, before whatever it was making the change pushed them back into agriculture. And even, I think, up until the time when the Romans came 2,000 years ago, the agriculture was a with, not an in spite of and against. And the sense of community. In Rome, part of what they did was to break the tribes so that the family unit was then a paterfamilias and all the people over whom he had control, not a tribe that lived in a roundhouse together as a unit. So the trauma impacted each of us, or each culture, slightly differently, but the impact was to separate us from the web of life. And I think absolutely crucial to our moving forward as a species is to reconnect, because we have this story that we tell ourselves that our heads are in charge, and that if we do pull lever A, event B will happen. We live in a very linear, complicated world. Complicated systems are systems that are linear and everything is predictable. Complex systems are non-linear and not predictable. So flying an aircraft, building an aircraft is complicated. There's lots and lots of parts. But if I give you a hangar and all the boxes and the right kind of IKEA instruction set and the right number of spanners, you can probably put a Boeing 747 together. No one's going to want to fly in it. But, in the end, Boeing's not a good example anymore because they do fall out of the sky. The Boeing of 30 years ago, they were quite safe, and the people who put them together knew what they were doing, and they hadn't designed them to fall out of the sky to make more money. So that's complicated. You push this button, this happens. nothing in nature is complicated. Everything is complex. It's unpredictable. And the butterfly wing in the Amazon can create a typhoon at the other side of the planet. And we don't quite understand how, and we don't need to understand how, because the point of being human is not that our heads are able to split everything into its component parts and work out how to stitch them together. For me, the point of being human is to sit in our heartlands, connect to the hyper complex emergent process that is the web of life, and ask, what do you want me to do? And then our heads, once we have the answer to that, we want you to write this book, then my head is down to, oh, okay, that's quite hard. How do I do that? That's what my head is for, is to work out how to do what the web of life needs me to do. But we've cut off from the web of life, and now our heads think we have to decide what to do as well as how to do it. And that's what's got us here. Sorry, that was a very long rant.
No, wonderful. And so many things that I'd like to pick up on, but one that just came towards the end was, so is this really part of how Manda Scott moved from being a vet to being an author of Thrutopian thrillers? Like,
there's a lot in between.
Yeah, I can imagine. But this notion of, there is no clear pathway from one place to another, but it's something about this process of connecting deeply. And I imagine that this is part of this shamanic work that you engage in. And as you were speaking, there was lots of threads to some of your past novels as well. You're talking about, the Roman
novels,
and the Celtic, the impact on the Celtic cultures and all of those things together. And what sprung to mind too was this notion of this pathway, the pathways of which we can imagine forward, and this notion that you talk about, the ghost lines, which also makes me think of somehow the song lines here in Australia. Where did the word ghost line come from, and how is that landed? And is it referencing song lines or some other?
It might be. Somebody was asking me to write stuff, and I wrote it, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, after I'd written it, which is often the process of writing stuff. Just arrives on the screen in front of you, used to arrive on a page, but I haven't ever written books when there was a page. It's always been a screen. And so it just arose on the screen. I thought, yeah, that's right. That's what we're doing. So the thesis is that as creatives, and every human being is a creative. We need to get past this idea that it's only the writers, everyone. We're casting ghost lines across the landscapes of tomorrow, and then we walk them. And then we turn them into paths. And when we look back, we can see they were paths. But looking forward, we can't see them as paths. Because this is part of our trauma culture needs predictability. It needs to be able to say that I can tell what's going to happen tomorrow. And we can't. And I think part of being in initiation culture is the understanding that every moment you're dancing on the knife edge of the moment. And you're part of the web of life, and tomorrow is unknowable. And that's fine. And those two things together, it's unknowable and I'm okay with that, are, I think, one of the several hallmarks of being in an initiation culture. And so I try to live like that. I'm not very good at it, but I try. It's a work in progress. But so is the interbecoming edge of wherever we're going a work in progress.
I really love that you say, that we are all creatives and we are all part of this, because, I think sometimes, I know that I do anyway. I sort of think, well, I'm very sort of pragmatic, and I do permaculture things, and I write, blogs, and I do podcasts and YouTubes and stuff, but I'm not a creative. There's mine in a narrative,
Everything you just said is a creative act. But that's writing fiction is a tiny part, and we do. Every human being, trauma culture or otherwise, everything we do, every seed you plant, every time we switch on to make a podcast, every time we move house or create a new relationship or get a new dog or have a baby, whatever, it's because we've told ourselves stories of how the world is going to be when that's happened. And I don't know about you, but my experience is that almost always those stories are wrong. This is a massive triumph of hope over experience. But what happens is great. Or maybe not, but I learned from it. The stories, we're always telling ourselves stories. The fact that some people get to write them down and get, to survive in the existing predatory capital structure as a result is an amazing and wonderful thing. But all of us are storytellers, every single one. Look at a politician. Are they or are they not spinning stories? Some of them are more believable than others, most of them not. but they're all telling stories. And we are listening to those stories because we are a storied species. It's what we do. It's who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's really empowering to really to sort of work into that space and to imagine and to feel that somehow the power and the agency is in the imagining what's possible. I think sometimes, I don't know how many times I could tell you I've been dismissed for being too much about what's positive and what's, possible. Like, we've got to get to what's real in today. It's like, this,
that's a limiting
I just can't
narrative.
find my way in speaking that. I just find myself going cold. It's like you're saying that the possibilities are immense,
are infinite,
and yes, infinite, absolutely infinite. And to be able,
and the people who say it's not possible are the people, that's another of these places. I shouldn't get cross with people, but I do, and that's just because person X cannot imagine how to do this doesn't mean it's not possible. And person X needs to get out of the way and free up their imagination. And that's part of Rob Hopkins of the Transition Town movement says that the predatory capitalism is a disimagination machine. It's designed to tell us that there is no alternative. And there are people who believe this, and that's the story they tell themselves. And they just need not to be given any agency. You can do your own thing. If you really believe that you want to live in this world, that's great, but the rest of us are going over here.
I did want to ask you about your writing process, actually. Do you have a practice of writing? How do you do this? You've written so many novels. How many is it now? Is it 16 novels and
there's 17 now, but one of them's not been published, and a non-fiction screenplays. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an emergent process also. I used to have quite a structured way of being, and there was the Boudica way, which was I lived on my own. I had 2 lurchers. I would spend the morning in the forest with the lurchers. I would come home and spend the afternoon and the evening writing. And that was it for 6 years. I got rid of the television. I never had a sound system in the first place. I sat with the fire at night, and periodically my very good friends would come and drag me out and tell me that, it was time to actually engage with the human world again, which is hard and bad. And sometimes they wouldn't bother. I remember vividly once I picked up the phone, old days landline, and said yes. And the voice now went, "Oh, you're busy. I'll call later." The only word I said there was yes. How do you know that? Okay, all right, that's good, because actually it's right. And that was a very particular act of dreaming. After that, I ended up in relationship, and it's hard to do that when you're in a relationship. You have to sometimes engage with the human world, much as I might not want to. I have a very forgiving partner. And so then I still had the dogs, and I would still go out for a walk in the morning. And there's a lot about that kind of 2 or 3 hours of just telling stories to myself in my head, working out what's gone wrong with what I've just written, what I need to fix, what happens next. Getting to know the characters and asking them what they need to do. And then I'd come home and write it. And now, then I went to college and did the master's, and then I came home with, we need to do things differently. We got the small holding. And so now I'm trying to run a small holding. And then I set up the podcast before I started the new book. And there's Accidental Gods. And I could spend all week just managing my email inbox. And I hate it. And I got to the point, I got a coach in January, and I took 28 pages of email inbox that I was not handling, and I just put them in the bin. It was one of the most liberating things I've ever done. I totally recommend it, on the grounds that if it really mattered, they'll mail again, and I'll probably still ignore it. And learning to triage my email inbox, I'm not so good at it at the moment, and the little bit that tells you how much you've got to go is about that size, and it's, oh God. So it's not nearly as structured now. So what I have now is I try and block out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday for writing, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is for doing other stuff. And it's since the book launch, that has totally fallen apart. So I think the thing about writing is, if you don't do it every day, it's really hard when you come back to it. If I have that 3 days off, Thursday morning is like, I don't know who anybody is. And the dog died, and I don't have a dog to go out with anymore. And I just haven't had time to get a new puppy, because it's a really big commitment. And the 6 months of what I'm doing is helping a puppy to understand that it's this little alien in a human world, and I'm really sorry, but I'm going to try and make it understandable for you. And that in itself is big, and I just haven't had the time. So I would be lying if I said, in an ideal world, I would do a couple of hours of admin. I would walk the dog, do a couple of hours admin. The rest of the day would be writing.
Yeah.
In the real world, I don't know how to get to that. And if you have any ideas, I'm really welcome. open to the thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd have to give up the
I've
podcast.
tried different things, from doing, just a block during the week, and then, like you're saying, that doesn't work either. So yeah, trying to do a little bit each day. But I wonder, in terms of uncovering what you wanted to talk about in your new book, like what kind of research did you find yourself diving into to find those things to construct the narrative that you wanted to share?
Books to show you. So I think we need to have a very brief look, and I'll keep this as short as I can. The book arose from my shamanic practice. I genuinely thought I'd stopped writing. I was doing the podcast, and as you know, we could record this today and you could put it out an hour from now if you really wanted to. It's of the moment. Whereas this book, we put it to bed at the end of March. We published it at the end of May, and that's almost physically impossible in publishing terms. But I actually stopped the writing 18 months before that. The rest, it went through 8 drafts of editing. So it's, and even then I was trying to tweak things at the last minute, which is never a clever thing to do in a book that, so many different moving parts. Changing one of them is a really, really silly thing. So, but I was teaching shamanic stuff. I taught a big course. I had a series of visions while I was drumming a journey, which sometimes happens, but not often. And mostly with shamanic work, I don't know if you do this, but it's what comes is metaphors and nudges and felt senses, and it can take a long time to work out what you're actually doing. This was 100% clear text. You will take this 30,000-year-old fossilized horse's tooth that holds one part of the southeast gate. You will find some ethically sourced horse skin. That took me the longest. Go up the hill, where I live on a small holding that's been here for a very long time, and there's a laid hedge going up the hill where the hawthorn is really thick. It was laid hundreds of years ago. Bind the tooth onto a particular point and sit with the small of your back and the tooth looking southwest down the valley in a particular frame of mind for at least an hour as the sun goes down every night from here forth. Okay. When it's that specific, you don't argue. You definitely don't start asking, but why, or what happens if I do it a different way? No, you just do exactly what you've been told. It took me a while to find the horse skin, which is good because I was sitting at homeopathy exam, and it's a long time since I sat an exam. I was a little bit focused, and I went and did it, and it was gorgeous. I'd never sat for an hour as the sun went down in one place in this particular frame of mind. It was lovely. I was sitting watching the crows go to bed. It was grand. And by the end of the week, I had the first scene of the book and the concept. And then the instruction really clearly was, now you write this book. I'm going, but I could be a homeopath. I'm going, no, you're not. You can write the book. Because you can't, the headspace for being a homeopath, headspace for writing a book, pretty much the same. I could not do both. And the homeopath thing, to be fair, wasn't something I'd been told to do. It was, what do I do now? And they went, don't know, whatever you want. I go, homeopathy? And they went, yeah, whatever you want. And it's like, no, you've done enough of that, write the book. And what I had was that first scene, which is of a woman lying on a bed and her grandson is beside her, and he says, when you come home, can we go and watch the crows go to bed? Which is exactly what I've been doing, crows being quite big in my life. And she says, no, this is not happening. I'm dying. You know this. We've talked about this. There is no coming home. This is it. And in the course of the ensuing conversation, he says, you're the only one who gets me. I don't want to live in a world with you not in it. And she realizes he's serious. He's 15. He's in that phase where everything is black or white. And she says, I don't know what happens next, but if you really need me and you call, if it's within my power, I will come. And she and he, they're both quite switched on, feel the gods pause in their labors and kind of look down and go, okay, that was a promise. And then she dies. And the whole of the rest of the book is told from her perspective, locked in the between place between the lands of life and the lands of death, having to honor this promise. And then the other thing that I saw was there is a shamanic concept of the void. And please, please don't do this. I thought I'd made it really, really clear in the book that this is a very dangerous place and it takes a lot of training. And Lan's had decades of training. And even then, and she's dead and she's still scared out of her wits. And then I had an email from someone going, I thought I'd go into the void. I was like, Jesus, fuck, you did what? And just don't do this. So really, I can't emphasize enough that just don't. But with enough training and being dead and having a guide who knows what they're doing, who's going, and even then it's very scary, and the prospect of absolute annihilation is real. You can go into the void and split the timelines and see, and she sees the many ways Finn could kill himself. But the point is, if you're there, there is a potential that you have agency. And if you take that agency, you may create a timeline that doesn't exist at the point when you're watching it. And you can't see it because it doesn't exist yet, because you haven't taken the agency. And so she's given the, okay, you want him not to die? You make it happen. And she doesn't know, how do you, as a newly dead person? She can't pick up a pen. She can't write anything. She can't make his guitar work. She can't hug him. What does she do? So she has to work out what she can do. And I based a lot of that on books I'd read of people's experiences of others who had died and had an impact. And then she splits the timelines twice more, once for her family and then once for the movement that is arising around her family. And that is when she sees the bus go over the edge of the cliff. In the many ways it could go over the edge of the cliff and the horror that would arise. But there is agency. And how could she then, it's a decade later by then, have agency to help the whole movement and therefore the whole of humanity move from the edge of the cliff? So that's what I was given. And without question, as I came down off the hill at that point, thinking, this is going to be hard. Writing historical novels was quite hard. This is going to be really hard. And if I hadn't been doing the podcast for several years by then, I would not have had a clue. That's why I set up the Thrutopia Masterclass, was realizing that I had more understanding of what was possible, what's being done, because I think that's the key thing, is the book creates avenues towards a future we would be proud to leave behind. Every single thing in the book, barring one yacht that I pulled together from technology that exists, is happening already somewhere in the world. All I did was give it a narrative arc and bring it into one place. And that's really important. And so what I've done with the podcast is talk to a lot of people, and then I've brought them all together. Since the book came out, this book also came out, which is written by Glenn Vile, who created quadratic voting. How impressed am I? And Audrey Tang, who was, let me do that so you can actually see it. Sorry. Yeah. Can you see that now?
I'm just going to read it out.
Plurality.
I can't even say that. Sorry.
Oh, yes. Plurality.
Can you say it for me?
Plurality. Shui. And it's by Glenn Vile and Audrey Tang. And Audrey Tang, until 3 weeks ago, was the digital minister of Taiwan, who has done the most astonishing things with digital media. She used to be a hacker, and she was the one in 2014 during the Sunflower Revolution that took the Ethernet cables in when the students went in and took over the parliament and held the debate that the government was refusing to hold. She took in the Ethernet cables so the whole country could see that they were peaceful. So when the government came in with the police and tried to tell everybody that these people were terrorists and that they needed to smash them, everyone had already seen that this was not the case. And so then they set up something called GovZero. So it's gov.tw is government for Taiwan. G0v.tw was GovZero. They just changed the O to a zero, and they then mirrored the government, but they did everything transparently. And it changed Taiwan. The minister then invited Audrey to be a reverse mentor, so young person mentoring old person, and then she became the digital minister. And she guided Taiwan through elections in January, where the Chinese were definitely trying to change the nature of their democracy, and she got it through. And she got it. We haven't got the time here now, but it's really interesting. I wrote an article in the New European recently, and if you want it, I'll send a link, because it's fascinating what she managed to do. How can we use digital technology for the benefit of humanity? In ways that we use social media not to create tribalism and spin us to the edges, but to find ways. You get social media uplifts for building bridges across contentious divides so that you bring people together. She's utterly amazing. So I use a lot of those concepts in the book, and now she and Glenn and I are in conversation of, okay, so I wrote the fictional one. I didn't know that you were writing plurality. How can we then build forward on that? So all the concepts of changing democracy, of changing how we use social media, of how we bring people together, because now we got sidetracked onto initiation and trauma cultures. In the old days, the Dunbar number was how we connected. Now we have technology. We can have communities of place, yes, but we can have communities of passion and of purpose. So my community of passion might have been my Warcraft community, which was huge. I used to play World of Warcraft. It's big in the book. It's how Lan and Finn connected. And partly I was still playing. I have currently given up for the 5th time, so I'm assuming it's probably not forever. I trust the people that I've been in the battleground with. I know them well enough to know the ones who are decent and the ones who do what they're told and the ones who do the best they can and the ones who are just hanging out at the edges trying to get kills and get kudos. And then there are communities of purpose. So building a future that matters might be a community of purpose. And that can be a Venn diagram where all three map onto one, or it can be a very wide Venn diagram where the only common node in the center is me. And I've got Dunbar numbers all around. And that's fine also. I can talk to you on the other side of the planet in real time. This was never possible before. And that changes the nature of the hyper-complex emergent process that is human community. And we can use that usefully. And so that really was at the basis of where that book went and where I'm taking the next one. And it doesn't mean that the existing structure won't fight back. Of course it will. People in power like having power. We have elevated the dark triad. And one of the things about initiation cultures was that if somebody turned up who was a particularly cunning narcissistic psychopath, they were probably isolated if they survived through the initiation to adulthood. We take those people and we give them the absolute power. And that's not clever.
Where are you seeing more of this Thrutopian writing and sharing? Like, are you seeing it coming through in films or any other kind of forms of media? Where are you noticing any? I mean, I know, through things like Happen Films. We've got the
Thrutopian Writers Association now.
What was
that? Sorry,
go
on. We've set up the Thrutopian Writers Association.
Yes.
But go on. You were about to say something really interesting.
I was going to say, there's groups like Happen Films who are telling stories of, things that are happening in communities, through film. And then there's, Dirt Girl Worlds, this amazing group in Australia, which they actually do a whole lot of children's programming across television, but through this lens of, say, a permaculture world, and it's this imaginary place, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Yay.
And it feels like it's a Thrutopian type of narrative that comes through there. But so it's definitely an emerging field. And I feel, and one of the things, the creator of this Dirt Girl World, she's actually spends a lot of time, her name's Kate McQuillan, she spends a lot of time in film and television world advocating for this change.
I need to talk to her. Do you know her?
Yes, I do. I'll send an email to both of you.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So she's really spends a lot of time conversing with people in the industry to weave in these narratives. So it's in the backstory. It just is holding whatever story is being told, that there's things that are in and around and through it. Yeah, great.
Yay. And in this country, so when we did the Thrutopia Masterclass 2022, and I invited mostly people who could talk about changing politics, changing economics, changing design, changing agriculture, all those things. Sorry, but I also invited people that were at the top of, that I could get to, the film industry, the publishing industry, theatre. And to a man and a woman, they said, you're never going to get this into our industry. You're going to have to do it on your own. And that was only 2 years ago. Although now in Europe, there's a thing called Climate Spring, which holds a competition. And it seems to me, until recently, the competition has been give us scripts that will happily greenwash everything. Because, and I think this is part of the problem, is that if you've got to the top of an industry that gatekeeps the narrative, that narrative is very narrow. The people, they were really nice people. One of them had been my editor and was then head of an imprint at a really big publisher, one of the biggest on the planet, and a really lovely person that I count as a good friend, and she just didn't get it. I explained the concept of Thrutopia over a long period of time, and it just did not sink in, because it was way outside where they were capable of seeing. And so the same with film. They don't get it because their entire narratives are locked in what we're doing. And it's going to take the people at the margins to do something that isn't, Don't Look Up was an interesting film, but it didn't do anything useful. It didn't offer any avenues to the future, because they can't see the avenues to the future. And they think, I once tried to spin this way back 10 years ago to someone, we were doing a different project, and I said, we need to start building these narratives of the future. And they went, oh, it'd be really Pollyanna-ish, surely. You have no clue, mate. No, I don't think it will, actually. Because if you don't think the existing system will fight back with everything it's got, you're not watching what's happening. But they're not. That's the thing. We live in a media ecosystem which is run by the 1% of the 1%, and it's designed to stop us seeing what's happening. And that sounds really conspiracist, but you watch the elections in the UK, probably. I mean, don't. It does very bad things to your head. And they're changing the ties on the existing establishment without changing a single thing about how it actually works. And same in the US. Trump is a horrible bogeyman, and I sincerely hope he doesn't get in. But Biden, I'm sure he's a charming and lovely person. He's not going to make the change that we actually need to see, and partly because he can't. The system is designed to maintain the existence of the system, and it takes total systemic change now. And getting that idea across to people at the head of publishing houses and production companies is almost impossibly hard. So I think it's going to take the small people at the edges changing things, although I have hope that this year's climate spring might be a bit different. I don't know. I think that the idea that we need total systemic change is gaining a degree of traction at the margins.
Yeah. It is a constant state of tension that we exist in, this notion that, well, you can't necessarily change that, the peaky power, because if you knock the bit off the top, another one will just come up again, and it just sort of needs to crumble in and of itself. But in the meantime, be creating this myceliating network of power that you're saying is on the edges, but somehow I think it's deeply in the roots of us all. Like, it doesn't matter where you are, you can scratch the surface, and there it is. There is that power. And I think something about what you speak to in your writing is pointing to that which exists already, and that coming back to that statement,
and just giving it legitimacy. Giving it, and it's there's a group over here called Parents for Future, and they're holding courses teaching people how to have what they call the difficult conversations routine, so at the school gates. And I think, certainly I find, once you start having those honest conversations with people, they're desperate to talk about it. It's just they don't know anybody else who's prepared to talk about it. And that's going to be a tipping point. You have 2 or 3 people at the school gate who are prepared to talk about it, and tomorrow you have 20, and the day after it's everybody. And there will still be 1 or 2 who are in the, climate change is not really a thing and it's all Chinese propaganda. And that's fine. That's fine. They can do their thing. Yeah. We don't need everybody. We just need most people.
Yeah. And just, spaces to have those conversations, catalysts to spark some of those conversations, and writings, stories, new stories to help to allow us to land in that space and explore it a little bit more. Yeah. And I like you're saying, we are storied beings in storied landscapes, and so the stories we hold and the stories we create, if we can weave in these Thrutopian notions, it feels like it does offer us a very strong way forward and something that's really hopeful. Because I think I heard you saying something before. No one's going to go towards something if they feel like it's what's the word, like, if it's dystopian, or if they're told they have to go because it's bad. It's an invitation, to come and explore and play in some space that feels like there's a richness and a hope and a possibility for us.
And as it builds the serotonin mesh, I think there has to be pride and that sense of self-respect. I think hope and pride, we're always told pride is a bad thing, but pride in community, that sense of I am being the best that I can, and the community values me for this because I am each of us, and I value the rest. It's not that I'm trying to say I am the biggest or the best. That doesn't happen in a functional community. It says I'm good at this, and I'll do this, and you're good at that, and you'll do that, and and then together we will create a functioning system that knows that each of us is absolutely crucial to this. And part of what our culture does is turn people into little widgets that are interchangeable, and nobody has that sense of being valued. So I think that sense of being able to step forward into a future where I will be the best that I can be. I will be doing what makes my heart sing. There's a concept of finding that sweet spot where your heart's greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. And everybody has that sweet spot, everybody. So I think that's really important. I think that concept, I occasionally get my students to do the exercise where we go back and back and back and back till we were molecules of hydrogen. And every single one of us, we've made it through 5 mass extinctions. Our ancestors are the ones that survived 5 mass extinctions where 97% of life on Earth became extinct. And our ancestors, the progenitors of who we are, didn't. And then even as human beings over 300,000 years, our ancestors are the ones who survived to be able to reproduce successfully. The chances against that are absolutely astronomical. The chances of each of us actually being here are tiny. And so we're here. Let's make the best of it. We're not just widgets. We were not born just to pay bills and die. We're here to be human and be the best of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It's really heartening to be reminded of that, because it does really speak to that, that value of being human. And it is about values. And what's next for you, Manda? What's coming up?
I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, I ask, what do you want of me every day, and I do whatever it seems to be right. I need a holiday. We're having a holiday next week. That'll be good. So I really want to write. I've got the first 10,000 words. I wanted 10,000 words down before the book launched, which is good because I hadn't written a single word since the 30th of May. But we'll get there. We also have a general election in the UK. I want to sway that, if I possibly can, towards people who actually get that we need a different world. So getting the book out there, I would love to turn it into television if anybody out there is interested. I think that's, this is our medium of the moment. This is how we reach more people. Or if anyone's on TikTok. I don't even understand how TikTok really works, but I gather it's a good thing. Because the point of the book is that the core of the thriller action, which we never really got to talk about, was a tweet, and in the days when it was still Twitter, sent by a 14-year-old girl. This is an intergenerational movement. There's 14-year-olds, and there's someone who's actually dead. It's not even just limited to being alive. And there's definite help from the more than human world. And I'm calling it a mytho-political thriller occasionally, which also people don't know what that means any more than they know what Thrutopia means, but that's okay. So we need all the generations. We need the young people to know that we get that we have screwed the future we thought we were giving them is not happening. But there is still a future that will be worth it to them and their kids and their kids and their kids and their kids. That it could be a future where people thrive in a flourishing planet. That is still possible. But it means that we need to absolutely do a screaming handbrake turn on the system that exists at the moment. It needs to stop. And I don't know anyone who thinks the current system is actually doing them any good. All we fight about is how to fix it. And usually we fight about how to fix it within incredibly narrow boundaries of, we'll tweak this tiny bit of the existing system and then everything will be fine. And that's not the way it works, guys. That's not going to happen. So change the system. We need a whole new system.
Turning the bus around by changing our story.
Yep.
And making spaces for conversation. What else can we do to turn this bus around as a final?
I think anyone with any spiritual inclination, you need to connect to the web of life. I don't really care what system you use to do it. It needs to happen. And we're very good at talking about, we need to be more connected. And we tend to call it nature as if it were something out there instead of something that is an integral part of us. And if you do it by working in permaculture and putting your hands in the soil, get to the point where it speaks to you and you speak back. My experience with the shamanic work is that the moment we open ourselves and go, hello, is there anybody there? It is desperate to connect. It's a two-way process. This is a reciprocal relationship. And it's life-affirming beyond anything you could possibly imagine. And it needs to happen. And I think that's probably the single most urgent thing people can do. But as we said earlier on, if people don't have spiritual inclination, you can't make it happen. So that I run courses on how to do this. And what I discover is people are going, I need 20 minutes a day of your time. And people go, no, I can't do that. Please, pretty please, 20 minutes of slightly less time on social media. Could you manage that? I think we need also to reclaim our limbic systems. The limbic hijack is real and big now. And that just, spend less time on social media. Spend less time with your screens, not the time that you're listening to podcasts, obviously, because you asked about how are we getting the stories out. And I think podcasting, actually, I'm amazed it's been allowed to continue because it is a way of getting stories out there that are different. And there are some extraordinary podcasts, this one among them, that are really shaping how we think. And because they're immediate and they're of the moment. And you can listen while you're driving or doing the washing up. Not that anybody does the washing up anymore. You can listen while you're doing other stuff. You can do this multitasking thing that our modern world makes us do with podcasts. I think it's utterly important. And audiobooks, actually. So find the ways you can connect to what is possible and then make it happen. And absolutely, as you said, I think telling the stories around the dinner table, talking in the queue in the supermarket. I had a really interesting conversation with the last behind the till last week. And all I asked her was, if somebody were offering you a political party that was taking the climate emergency seriously and wasn't trying to offer options, but was beginning to work towards it, would you vote for it? And she said, in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But she said, my mum wouldn't, because she doesn't even want to believe it's happening, and she's 60. I think, oh,
yeah,
that's kind of sad.
I think just what you just said then too, about asking really good questions that help to make us think, and to be, be courageous, just to open up a conversation with people rather than just walking around in our bubbles. Gosh.
Yeah, asking questions is a political act. And,
yes.
and I think, people now, we're having an election and people go, oh, I'm not political. No, you are political. I'm sorry. There is no such thing as not being political. If you are saying you're not political, then you are defaulting to the existing system, and the existing system is not serving us. That's a political act too. But asking questions is a political act, and asking them with an open heart, not I've pre-crafted this conversation to lure you into a particular corner.
Yeah.
We need to be interacting in good faith, and that's one of the things we've lost.
Yeah.
Is good faith interaction.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Manda, for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to have your company here. So much to think about, and so much to explore in terms of taking whatever it is that we're doing and weaving this through it. It can be anywhere, can't it? It's not just
totally
in a creative.
It has to be everywhere.
It is lifing. This is life.
Yeah.
And this is where we need to take it.
Yes.
So thank you so very much.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been a joy. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World. Check out the show notes below to find the links to Manda's website, podcast, and books. And also check the notes for where to find details of our permaculture courses and resources. And make sure too to sign up to hear all the news and updates from us. And come and join us at the Permaculture Education Institute to learn practical skills for designing and teaching permaculture and making a good livelihood while living a permaculture-inspired one planet way of life. See you next time.